Hi, my name is Caton-Greasley. This submission is for the Licentiate Diploma, Teaching Diploma, with the London College of Music. I was asked as part of the presentation for this diploma to include how I would teach somebody as they approached a graded standard. And the first thing I thought would be wise to introduce is the fact that I have my own programme that helps me ascertain when somebody's ready and what skills they already have before I choose their pieces. This first page is the fluency checklist, so what the student can do in relation to the piece. We then have an interpretation. This is interpretation of general music as opposed to specific to a piece. We have a knowledge checklist, which is about the viva voce. So for a piece of music we answer who the composer was, when did he live, who else wrote music at this time, so his contemporaries, can you describe the mood and the speed of a piece, that sort of thing. We have a series of scales. These are in advance of the graded standard because I think scales need to be a little bit ahead. We then have a written checklist, which is for the theory of music, so we can verify that we can talk about intervals in a piece, we can talk about scales and chords and all that sort of thing. We need to know how to do it. So each student that I teach has one of these sets of checks in this folder. And these checks go up to grade 3. Once we reach grade 3, which is the end of the elementary standard, we have a different way of doing it. Now, for each student, we have a 6-week report pack, and we work on 6-week cycles because that's the half term. So I do have students who take lessons only in term time, but not in half term, so a 6-week report works very well. Now, for the lesson, we do a plan of what we want to do in the lesson. We've got learning objective, activities, expected outcome, and practice and homework requirements. Then during the lesson, we summarise what happened in the lesson, what I need to bear in mind for next week, and in this case it's that I have to order the music for her, and I've got to remember that she needs 2 lots of flashcards printing out, hence this. And for some reason today she didn't know what quasi meant, so this needs revising next week. Then at the bottom I've put in here an evaluation of how I taught the lesson, what I did that I felt was positive and things that I wasn't too sure about. Like here, this is the first time I've actually given a student instructions on how to use a QR reader on their phone to be able to translate the documents that I've given them into sound. So I hope I explained it enough. Student's 10, she should be quite tech savvy, so fingers crossed. At the end of the 6-week period, we have a summary report, and the parent gets a copy of this so they know what they've paid for, and in some cases what the student hasn't done. Some parents we never see, so this is the only contact that they have with us, so they know what they've paid for. Anyway, down to business. The first piece that I've chosen from the set is a grade 1 piece, Quasi Adagio. Quasi Adagio is, in my opinion, a little hard for a grade 1 piece when you compare it to something like Allegretto. So in the grade 1 book, looking at each piece and comparing each piece, the set that Quasi Adagio is in is the middle set, the B set. So we've got the flying trunk and we've got flying above the clouds. These are completely different in standard to Quasi Adagio and all of them need completely different skill sets in many ways. Quasi Adagio was chosen for this student because she particularly likes the tonalities of the folk music, and it's because of the dialogue that I've had with her that we came to this knowledge. And when I teach a piece of music, before we start, I have a work programme like this. This is the knowledge book that goes with my knowledge level sheet, and in here we have a comprehension and some questions. We have little quizzes and word searches and tick boxes on what we need to do, what we need to learn. We also have a practice plan on how to plan out what we're doing, and a reflective experience for the students so they can see how what they've done or not done has actually helped. We have a theory workbook to go with this piece as well that I've put together that looks at the scales, looks at what hand to use because both hands are in the treble clef, which is quite a challenge at this stage. We add in some notes, so they have to go through the book and find the bars and copy out the piece in your own handwriting. Often tell the story of when Bart copied a piece by moonlight because his brother wouldn't let him. We have an exercise section, and this brings us into technical exercises that the piece requires. Paper aeroplanes is a great way to teach accents and the difference between accents and marcato, which is what we do here. And as you can see, we move through different exercise points. Then finally, we have a sight reading practice, where the sight reading is closely related to the piece. I've written it all myself. And the QR codes that I mentioned before are here, where they have to listen to the piece and fill in the blanks from the QR code. There's some more where we have to fill in the dynamics. This gives the student a very active getting prepared to do the piece. From a teacher's perspective, I've put together a set of technical requirements here on how to teach the piece, and for my teachers here, obviously I run my own academy, we've also put together a how to teach this piece and how to be aware of what the student needs at every section and in every way for the piece. So sound skills, pedal skills, prerequisites, practice skills, and what they need to put the music together. We have all the answers to the workbooks as well, just to hand, just in case you need them. So some of the things that I like to teach on Così Adagio, and the thing that I was teaching to my student in the lesson was when we go to the phrasing in the very first section, which is this section here, we have the phrase and the phrase again. While in the left hand we have to phrase while the break is in the right. So and to teach this in the workbook, we learn this first, then we learn to do the A to the D, the bottom of the chord, then we learn the top of the chord, E to F sharp, and then we put the chord together. If that causes a problem, we go back to the bottom, then the top, then together. Then we bring the right in, then we'll do it with just the bottom one, and then we'll put them together. Now when we've got that little chunk, then we'll expand it to take the whole 2-bar phrase. And just because a student can do it there, doesn't mean they can do it there. So the next practice will be do it towards the end of the line. We also do work in the workbook on moving between the 3, and I believe I covered this in the sample video as well, where we have to go to the D and back again, then E to the F sharp and back again. This is all covered in the workbook. Now, if a student is under the age of 13, 14, it depends on the student, we put all this together in a lap book where we also include flashcards that are used in the piece. These are question cards. These are discussion cards that you can discuss with parents, with the teacher, before or after the lesson. We have a little certificate card for when you've completed a workbook. Each week has its own categories of what need practicing, and it's all written down. And for parents who are enthusiastic and supportive, the learning objectives are on the back there. We have a practice card where you write all your practice down. Just in case you need it, we have a circle of fifths, a summary of key signatures and intervals. All the workbooks are here to practice and everything's in the same place, so a student can work through it in their own time in a fun package that everybody likes to fill in. Now this is for Preludium, oops, my scarf's getting stuck, which is the second piece that I chose for my set of pieces. Now there's a version in the book, but there's also a version on IMSLP, which is presented quite nicely. So sometimes I'll use the IMSLP version before I buy the book, but when the student's ready for the exam, they get the book. So here we go, we've got again a knowledge book. This brings in a comprehension on Bach and some quizzes and games on Bach and finding out about who he was and what he taught and what he played. We've then got some sight reading based on the Preludium, based on the style of piece. We've then got some exercises here. These are a little bit different because you have to follow the QR codes again, but fill in the details of what you hear. Now on the other side you've got all your QR codes. Let me just turn over. Oopsie. Here we go. So here's all your QR codes and you follow the guidelines and name the interval number or describe the interval or name the chord, and that's what all this is about. The teacher's notes at the back give you the answers. Then we have technical exercises, what is required for the Preludium. Also a little bit of improvisation in this one because the chords where the mordant comes in, it's really nice to improvise over the chords at the top, and a great way to bring improvisation into a classical syllabus. Some 4-part harmony as we come to the chorale at the end. Copy showing the phrasing and how the phrasing goes across the bar line to the A, to the B and to the E, and that's something that is very important. And then we have theory based on intervals and theories of the sevenths and lots of different scale based, tonic, dominant, subdominant. We have a teacher's book that brings in the details of what is required, the technical requirements, the musical elements, rhythmic elements. And then we have a more comprehensive teacher's guide on what skills are going to be used, what style skills, what technical skills, what are the prerequisites for the student, and a lesson plan. Where is it? What you can expect to teach exam standards. So if you wanted a distinction, a merit or a pass, what we would expect there. Answers to the questions in the workbooks, and finally a timeline on what you can expect over an 8-week period from activities and learning objectives. This helps me make sure that a student is moving in line with what I would expect. Now what we're talking about with the phrasing over the bar line, at this stage so many young people are used to phrasing well within the bar, and they don't really think about moving out of what's been dictated, what's been said, or thinking about what they're doing and listening to it. All they do is translate what's exactly on the page. And whilst in essence there's nothing wrong with that, sometimes when it comes to Baroque music, it may not be exactly right, and maybe there's reasons not to do it like it's shown, and maybe there's reasons to think a little bit further to what the music is actually telling you. So here we have, and then it builds again. So or we could play it all in one run. Now, being aware of the direction of the phrase across the bar line gives the student an awareness of where the movement is, which, although we wouldn't put any particular dynamics in because of that, and although we wouldn't put an actual phrase break in, a breath, as if you're playing it on a recorder or a flute, is highly beneficial. Sometimes I do grab my flute and demonstrate it. So here, just that little before you carry on gives it a little bit of shape, and it doesn't become a long line of notes. It's like beads on a necklace with no break. So that's one of the things that I like to point out. We're talking about theory and exercises. And one of the things I like to bring in with this one, as you can see here, is we talk about the dominant, the tonic and the subdominant. A little bit early in one way, but we listen to the chord and then we break the chord up. Then we listen to the next chord. Then we listen to the next chord. And we listen to the final chord. Now, depending on the student, I may bring the inversions in, I may bring more information in on the sevenths, but the most important thing here is to bring the relationship of this one, the tonic, the subdominant, the dominant, and the tonic. And using this piece, Bach has put a fantastic framework in where we can actually teach the relationship between these chords and how they're used. You can tell it was written as a teaching piece because it's so perfect, which is one of the things we do with this. Now we have to move on because we only have 30 minutes. So the next piece that I chose is one of the optional pieces out of the grade 5 syllabus, which is the fabulous Chopin. Now, there's a couple of different things with this one. It's quite an interesting piece because the wonderful Denis Aguet in The Joy of Chopin has this version, and when you look at it, he brings in the 8VA, where is it? Wrong side. He brings in the 8VA a little too early. If you go on to wonderful IMSLP, you can download a copy where the 8VA comes in at the right place, which, looking at Chopin's original score, again, which is on IMSLP, you can see where he dotted the 8VA sign in. Now, with this piece, we have a different learning program with it now. Instead of the split into 4 categories that is in the other one, I've put together much more of a more mature system where we're preparing to perform this piece and we want to look at the ways in which we can get a good preparation. So we have a weekly planner because I really do believe everything should be planned out and not taken ad hoc. And we have a monthly planner so you can see where you're up to and where you're going. In this workbook, the first section is a comprehension about Chopin, tells you a little bit about who the man was, Chopin. And this is in effect a CV for them to fill in on who Chopin was. Really puts the viva voce, or the question and answer, into a modern setting when you look at what his networking links were, what his professional summary would be. We've got here, how does the music make you feel when you listen to it? And there's one there in the middle on about Chopin's life, his health, his well-being, his partners, etc. Section 2 moves on from Chopin and starts looking at some technical exercises and remote notes and pedal skills, etc. How to translate the ornamentation and little reminders at the top. When we move to section 3, we're moving to musicianship and we're looking at a little bit about the skeleton base behind how we use the different touches. Penelope Roskell has a fabulous book, The Complete Pianist, The Complete Healthy Pianist, I think, and a lot of these information pages are from there. We talk about pedal work, we talk about phrasing and rubato and how to master it all. And then we're looking at some theory sides of things here and the themes and structures, plus some suggested reading. From a teacher's perspective, we have a book at the back that breaks down, the technical requirements for Chopin, what you need to teach in a lesson. Then, pages are stuck together. The musical elements, the pitch considerations, the range a student needs to be confident with, interpretation skills, what's required, performance skills, and this is really giving me an idea of what my student needs before we can start the piece. We have a summary of the piece, the form of the piece, what makes it easy, what makes it hard, what are the challenges in the piece. So this booklet together gives me a really good starting point for the student. And in this little box I also keep handy for the lesson a little set of prompting cards, because lessons, you can get carried away with lessons. Well, I can get carried away. I get carried away with a lot of things. There's waltz. And we have a set of prompting cards. My waltz cards must still be in one of the teaching rooms. So these are for Snow, Moon and Flowers, which we'll come to next. But I have little prompting cards like this, which tells me tempos and characters and things. So in the lesson I generally have these on the edge of the piano to help me through, so I don't get carried away. So talking about remote notes, Chopin, the left hand has to be super confident, because without a confident left hand, when you're coming through these jumps, where we've got this, if you're not confident there, those jumps miss. You completely mess up the feeling. So to start off with, we'll take one of the lowest notes, and there are times when this low A comes in. So we jump from there to 5, so you get used to that jump. When you can do that, we take, now if we're doing a chord of A minor, obviously third finger here, to third finger, and then to the thumb. Then we'll split it, and we'll get it to the minor third, and then we'll do it to the major third, and then we'll do it to the full chord. Now this system you'll find online. I got it through some investigations on YouTube. It's promoted by Josh Wright, who's a piano pedagogue from, I think, America, Dr. Wright, and he promotes this system. I've used it with a couple of pupils and got to say it really works. What I've added to the system though is he talks about the ascending jump, but I've also added to it the descending jump. So using the A minor chord again, from the 5 on A down to the D, from the 3 on C down to the D, from the thumb on E down to the D, and then from the thirds and the chord. And after considering what the most essential skill was for this Chopin, I would say that these jumps are the most essential, because it doesn't matter how good your triplets are, your quintuplets, your ornamentation, if you miss one of those bass notes, you've blown the piece. So before you start any of the intricacies that make Chopin as amazing as he is, practice the remote notes. While you're practicing those remote notes, you can introduce a little bit of the pedal skill. So you half pedal on the top note, then back to the bottom one, and half pedal on the top note. So you can bring in some half pedaling as well, which is essential because of the seconds. If you don't have that half pedal, without that half pedal on that second chord, you're going to get too much blur. So you could use this exercise a double hit with techniques. So that's how I would teach the Chopin. Snow, Moon and Flowers. Snow, Moon and Flowers. It's a fantastic piece. This is one of my favourites. I love teaching grade 8 because of this piece. I brought the grade 8 associated board book with me. Sometimes I use Peter Sculthorpe's night pieces with the piano on the front saying 1971. And sometimes I use this. Sometimes I also use the Trinity because it's in Trinity as well. Anyway, today, Snow, Moon and Flowers. Such a different piece, such an unusual piece. So you have to be very, very careful who you choose it for. Again, I've done a workbook on what to expect. Just move slightly sideways, see if we can do it without it falling over this time. Snow, Moon and Flowers is a piece on imagery. To start off with, we have all the plans that we had in the Chopin book. This is one of my students' books, so that's what the filling in's for. We have a little bit of information about Peter Sculthorpe, and this is his CV, my style. And then we have an introduction to Chinese and Japanese poetry, because if you understand poetry, the piece takes on a different life. And this is a listening exercise. What does it remind you of? And this student said mountains and hills, alone time, and it made him feel relaxed. Then we start looking at technique. This piece has got so much technique in it. Its sparsity of notes is quite deceptive. So there's a lot of talking here about different skills and pedal skills that you need that we do in lessons. Then we're talking here about essential techniques. What has the student taken from section 2? What techniques are needed? What is the essential technique in Moon? It's really interesting here because my students have put a complete respect of the silence. And silence, I think, is hard, even at grade 8. Silence is hard. Essential technique for flowers, half pedalling, keeping the lower tones carried over. Now, this student is still struggling with half pedalling, but he understands the importance of it. Musical imagery, what he sees, falling snow on the breeze, the stillness of the moon and fields of flowers fluttering near temples. I think that's a lovely view. And then pedal requirements. He said to cover the movement with when necessary. I don't agree with him because he's going to find out next lesson that we follow strictly what's been given here. And moving on to section 3, we're talking about musical colour, how colour can be used in the music and how to bring out colour in the music. We're talking more about the pedal because the pedal on this piece is so important. This is next week's work, looking at the 2 pictures, which one do you prefer and why? These are both labelled Snow, Moon and Flowers and both relative to the composition. And then we're talking about the written music. We're learning about the anhemitonic scale, we're learning about the Japanese modes that are included, we're learning about the harmonies and listening to them, so listening to the individual lines of chordal harmonies. And here we are comparing listening skills, so 3 very different performances of Snow, Moon and Flowers. What do you hear? What's the difference? Percentage of musical knowledge, how musical knowledge is important to listening, and percentage of artistic imagery. So how much is the picture important in relationship to the musical knowledge? And some suggested reading and where he can study further. From my perspective, I've put everything down into the technical requirements for when I train my teachers. Statements about the piece, study statements, what makes the piece easy, what makes it challenging, about textures and timbres and registers, about styles of music and form, and all this is here. The fact that this is influenced by Japanese art, the length of the pieces, it's all very important for when you're actually teaching the piece. So we get to the piece. Oh, the little cards I spoke about. The first one gives you the prerequisites. Then on these ones, we're talking about the presentation and what I discuss with the student. So when we introduce the piece, these are the things that we discuss. Then what is the desired sound? How to produce the desired sound, referencing Penelope's book. And then how to indicate and how to demonstrate. And I've said here that with snow, you would indicate by playing the whole piece because should we try that again? That really shouldn't have happened. Just can't demonstrate a section of that. You've got to demonstrate the whole thing. And teaching it without demonstrating it would be doing it an injustice because the resonance is part of the experience and you can't gain that resonance without demonstrating the whole piece. Same would apply with Moon. You've got to experience it. You could get away with demonstrating if you wanted just the etc. But by stopping too early, you've lost out on the whole experience, and that's why I think Snow and Moon need to be demonstrated fully to get the experience and the feeling of that drop. And these are where the remote note practice from the Chopin really pays dividends. If you've done your remote note practice, these jumps will not be a problem. Again, if the remote note practice was completed, that sort of thing won't be a trouble. So by the time a student gets to this, I want them to have a complete package, all the bits in place, so that we can really get the feel, the imagery out of this grade 8 piece. When you're moving through to flowers, I like to bring in the fact that we start off with this, then the E flat to the F is in one character, then when you bring in the rest of it, you've changed, and that's where the Japanese character comes in with this lovely Japanese mode that's ascending, and he uses it all the way through. So you get this. It changes. And bringing out that mode really brings the fact that this is an Oriental style piece. You may have characteristics in it that aren't Oriental, but the whole piece is. And this is a piece which demonstration is absolutely essential. Half an hour has passed. This is the end of the presentation. I think to really just put a moment on the end, just to say that the teacher understanding these pieces and knowing these pieces is essential to them performing these pieces for the student. And whilst it's beneficial to let the student hear different performers, it's also really important for the student to hear the teacher perform some of these pieces. When I did my CTA-BRSM way back in 2006, I was so nervous about performing. I still find performing incredibly difficult, but I understand the importance, and I've pushed myself over the years to be able to sit down and say, right, this is what it sounds like. And I think my students have benefited. I think that through me learning that performance is absolutely essential, or demonstration is absolutely essential, my students have gained, and my teachers who I guide through their education have also gained. So it's interesting that even as